From the Oklahoman newsroom, this is a Thunder update. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with Eric Horn, Thunder beat writer. I haven't said Thunder update in a while.
It's been a long time. Yeah.
But here we are. Media Day is in the rearview mirror. Camp is right in front of us as the Thunder gets ready to start their season. And Eric, Media Day, it was on Monday, and everybody was there. We got to meet some new faces, see some old faces. Highs of the day from your perspective.
Just trying to figure out what this team and this organization in the field was going to be like post Russell Westbrook, and so far, so good. I didn't go as far as to make any snap judgments about this being a different feel. I think that some people were trying to will that into fruition, but started off well. Chris Paul came in, good spirits. Obviously had the funny comment to Barry Trammell that was very anti what Russell Westbrook would have done. He immediately said, "Oh, hey Barry, how you doing? Long time." They treated each other like they were play cousins, as our former editor Mike Sherman would say. But it was a good atmosphere. It was fun. A lot of people talking about how this the offensive changes without having two ball dominant guys in Westbrook and Paul George is going to make for a more player-centric or team-centric offense, and that's kind of a natural thing when you lose two ball-dominant players like that. But overall, it was a good feel. You got good news from the Andre Robertson front in terms of him feeling like he's ready to come back and participate in some practices. So just positivity overall. That should be the message going into a training camp.
Obviously I mentioned, new faces and old faces, but I think, Andre Robertson, where is he? Sounds like he's going to be out there for the start of training camp. I saw him running at one point, which I didn't expect to see at Media Day, but there he was taking off across the arena at one point. But what's Steven Adams' role in this whole thing? I think, Dennis Schroeder, how does he fit into the whole thing? I know there'll be a lot of talk about new guys, but how are these old guys, the veterans that we've seen be part of this organization for several years, how are they reacting to all of this?
I asked Steven Adams about it, and really mature answers from him. I think that he's a guy who's not going to outright say it, but he is one of the leaders of this team now, being the longest tenured guy on the team with Andre Robertson, both going into their 7th season. And Steven Adams kind of said, it's a leader by committee aspect when it comes to leading, but also at the same time with the situation that the Thunder's in, not knowing about the futures of Chris Paul, not knowing about the future of Danilo Gallinari, and even Steven Adams and some other guys like Dennis Schroeder and Andre Robertson being thrown in the trade rumor mill in the offseason, he kind of took a measured approach to it and saying, look, it affects you when you hear about that trade stuff, the trade rumors, but at the same time, we can't deviate from what we've done in the past. We need to be grateful for the time we've had in Oklahoma City. And I think that, this summer was kind of an eye-opening experience for a lot of those guys that are left over. Steven Adams, Andre Robertson talking about in the past year and a half how his life has changed and how he's got a new perspective on the game. So it's interesting to hear those guys talk that way. It's interesting for there to be, different voices at the head of this team besides Russell Westbrook. And it'll be interesting to see once they start playing, how the ball is distributed, where the shots are coming from, because you're losing two of the, top 15, 20 guys in the league in Russell Westbrook and Paul George.
You mentioned positivity before and sort of the highs of the day. Were there any lows? Was there anything that sort of struck you as a little bit of a downer from Media Day?
It's I don't know if it's necessarily a low, but it is a difference. You do kind of, appreciate when you have this star power that led off these media days for however many years, whether it's a Russell Westbrook, a Paul George, or even a Carmelo Anthony. And I think that you take for granted, being in the room and the privilege of being able to interact with these guys who've seen a lot throughout their NBA career. Chris Paul was great yesterday, but it was a different feel. Chris Paul was very brief. He had some very direct answers. Didn't get into a lot of storytelling necessarily. And that's something that guys like Carmelo Anthony were really good at. Even Paul George to an extent, definitely not Russell. But those guys and kind of the gravity that they brought to a media day made it more of a spectacle. And yesterday didn't feel like a spectacle. It felt very, this being my 5th year covering the team, it felt more in and out than your previous media days where you had these big storylines around Kevin Durant leaving, or the Thunder pairing together or putting together a trio of all-star, future Hall of Fame players. It didn't feel like that this time. It felt more of kind of business as usual and a little bit more direct than it did in previous seasons.
Yeah, now we get to see what this team is going to be like now that media days in the rearview mirror. Now the work begins for Billy Donovan and the Thunder. Eric, Matty Lee will both be there throughout training camp, so be sure to follow them on Twitter if you don't already, and be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at Oklahoman.com and every day in the Oklahoman.